Here is the argument that has stumped philosophers, silenced theologians, and haunted scientists for centuries. If something can create everything, who created that something? And if the answer is nothing created it, it always existed, then why can't we say the same about the universe itself? You see, the moment you try to explain existence with a creator, you haven't solved the mystery. You've simply moved it one step back, and that step leads nowhere.
Let's start somewhere simple, somewhere you've been 1,000 times. You're sitting in a room. Maybe it's your bedroom. Maybe it's a quiet cafe. Maybe it's just the chair you're in right now. You look around and everything in that room has a history. The table was built by someone. The coffee in your cup came from a plant that grew in soil, watered by rain, warmed by a sun that's been burning for 5 billion years. The window glass was sand once, melted, shaped, cooled. Even the air you're breathing was exhaled by other creatures, cycled through oceans and forests over millions of years. Everything you can see has a cause. Everything you can touch came from something else. This is so deeply built into how we think that it feels like an absolute law of reality. Things don't just appear. Things come from other things. Effects have causes. Creations have creators. And this intuition is powerful. It's responsible for science itself.
Every time we see an effect, we go looking for its cause. We trace rivers to their source. We trace diseases to their origin. We trace the universe to the Big Bang. But here's where something quietly uncomfortable begins to happen. The moment you accept that everything needs a cause, you've wandered into a logical trap without even noticing it. Because if everything needs a cause, then whatever created the universe also needs a cause. And whatever caused that needs a cause. And so on forever, in an infinite chain that never ever reaches a starting point. Unless you decide to cheat. Unless you say, okay, the chain of causes stops at one special thing. One thing that doesn't need a cause. One thing that just exists, uncaused, eternal, self-sustaining. Most people, when they hear this, nod and say, yes, that's God. But here's the question nobody stops to ask, the question that changes everything. Why does God get to break the rule? Why is it acceptable to say God needs no cause, but completely unacceptable to say the universe needs no cause? What makes one answer profound and the other absurd? That's where this gets interesting.
The question nobody really asks, and I mean really asks, not just rhetorically, but with full seriousness, is this. What does it actually mean for something to exist without a cause? We throw that phrase around so easily. God is uncaused. God is eternal. God existed before time. But what do those words actually mean? Can we even form a coherent mental picture of them? Think about it. Every concept we have of existence comes from things that exist inside the universe, inside time, inside space, inside cause and effect. The word before only makes sense inside time. The word somewhere only makes sense inside space. The word created only makes sense inside a chain of cause and effect. So when someone says God existed before the universe, they're using the word before, a time word, to describe something outside of time. That's not a deep truth. That's a grammatical collision. It's like asking, what's north of the North Pole? The question sounds meaningful. The words are all real words, but the combination points to nothing. Now, to be fair, physicists do something similar. When they talk about the universe emerging from a quantum vacuum, or about time itself beginning at the Big Bang, they also reach the edge of language. They also bump up against the wall where words stop working. But here's the crucial difference. Physicists know they're at the edge. They say openly, our models break down here. Our mathematics runs out. We are at the boundary of what we can know. The problem with the divine explanation isn't that it reaches the edge of understanding. Everything reaches the edge. The problem is that it pretends there is no edge.
It fills the mystery with a word, God, and calls the mystery solved. But naming a mystery is not the same as solving it.
Let's look at what cosmology and physics actually tell us about the beginning, or what might be called the beginning of everything. For most of human history, the universe was assumed to be eternal. No beginning, no end, just always there. Then, in the early 20th century, everything changed. Edwin Hubble looked through his telescope and discovered that galaxies were moving away from us and away from each other. The universe was expanding. Run that expansion backwards, like rewinding a film, and everything contracts. All the matter, all the energy, all of space itself, compressed down and down and down until you reach a single point of unimaginable density and temperature, a singularity. And then, approximately 13.8 billion years ago, that singularity expanded in what we call the Big Bang. Now, the instinctive question is, what happened before the Big Bang? And here is where physics gives an answer that sounds evasive, but is actually one of the most profound statements ever made in science. Time itself began at the Big Bang. Not that the Big Bang happened inside time. Not that there was a clock ticking before it went off. Time, as a dimension of reality, as the thing that makes before and after meaningful, did not exist before the Big Bang. Because time is part of the universe. It's woven into the fabric of space-time. And that fabric came into existence with the Big Bang. So asking what happened before the Big Bang is like asking what is south of the South Pole. The question feels grammatically correct, but it refers to nothing. There is no before to point to. Stephen Hawking described this using the concept of imaginary time, a mathematical framework in which the beginning of the universe looks less like a sharp starting point and more like the smooth, pole-like surface of a sphere, where asking what came before is as meaningless as asking what's above the top of a globe. The universe may simply have no edge in time, no moment zero that required a trigger. It may be, in its own strange way, self-contained. This is where the scientific story is fascinating, but it's also where it gets dangerous for a certain comforting idea. Here is the twist, and it's a big one. The cosmological argument for a creator, the oldest, most famous, most emotionally resonant argument in the history of philosophy, rests entirely on one premise. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. Everything that begins to exist. Philosophers who defend this argument are careful with that word begins. They're not saying everything has a cause. They're saying specifically that things which start, things that have a beginning, must have been caused to start. And they say, the universe began, therefore the universe has a cause. Therefore, that cause is God. It sounds airtight. Until you ask, what does it mean to begin? Because beginning, starting, is a concept that only exists inside time. It requires a before and an after. It requires a moment when something wasn't, and then a moment when it was. But if time itself began with the universe, then the universe didn't begin in any meaningful sense. There was no before in which it didn't exist. There was no moment of transition from non-existence to existence. There was simply the universe, with time as part of its structure. The very premise of the argument collapses. You cannot say the universe began to exist if beginning requires time and time is part of the universe. And this is not wordplay. This is not a clever trick. This is what the physics actually suggests. The question of what caused the universe may be not just unanswered, but unanswerable. Not because we're not smart enough, but because the concept of causation itself breaks down at the boundary of time. But now comes the deeper twist, the one that makes this not just a physics problem, but a philosophical earthquake.
Even if we grant that the universe had a cause, nothing about that leads us to a personal God, a conscious being, an entity that cares about humans. The cause of the universe, if it exists, could be a mathematical principle, a deeper law.
A quantum fluctuation in a pre-existent void, a cycle of universes, anything. To leap from the universe has a cause to that cause is a thinking, willing, loving God is not logic. It is hope dressed up as logic. I want you to imagine something. Try to really do this. It takes a moment, but it's worth it. Imagine you are a conscious being who has existed for an infinite amount of time before the universe was created. Not a very long time. Infinite time. No beginning. Just always there, thinking, existing, aware. Now ask yourself, what were you doing? For an infinite amount of time, in a void with nothing else in existence, what were you experiencing? What were you thinking? What caused you to think anything at all, if there were no external events, no changes, no stimuli? And here is the deeper problem. If you existed in perfect, unchanging stillness for an infinite duration, why did you act at all? Why did you decide, after infinite time of doing nothing, to suddenly create a universe? What changed? What caused the decision? If you are timeless and unchanging, nothing can change your state. And if nothing changes your state, you can never decide to do anything. An eternal, unchanging consciousness cannot act, because action requires change, and change requires time. The moment you try to imagine an eternal creator deciding to create, you've sneaked time back into the picture. Because deciding is a process. Processes require change. Change requires time. This is the hidden contradiction inside the concept of an eternal, timeless creator. A being outside of time cannot perform actions, cannot cause things, cannot decide. Try the thought experiment from the other side. Imagine you're watching the first moment of the universe, not from inside it, from outside, from some impossible vantage point beyond space and time. You're watching nothing become something, and you ask, who did this? Whatever your answer, the moment you imagine a who, a conscious, purposeful entity, you've imagined something that exists, something with intentions, something with an internal state that moved from one configuration to another. You've imagined something that has before and after. You've imagined something inside time. You cannot step outside your own conceptual framework. Every model of a creator you can construct inherits the features of the only kind of mind you've ever known: human, time-bound, cause and effect operating minds. And perhaps that's the most important thing to notice in this entire conversation. Our idea of God is not derived from logic. It is derived from us. It is a projection of human-style consciousness, inflated to infinite scale and placed at the origin of everything. That's not a discovery. That's a mirror. Let's go deeper, because the physics here is stranger and more wonderful than any metaphor we've built around it. At the smallest scales of reality, scales so small they make an atom look like a solar system, the rules of cause and effect begin to dissolve. In quantum mechanics, particles do not have definite positions or states until they are observed or measured. They exist in superpositions, smeared clouds of probability, simultaneously here and there and everywhere and nowhere, until something interacts with them and forces a definite outcome. This is not a limitation of our knowledge. It is a fundamental feature of reality. The universe, at its core, is not deterministic. It is probabilistic. Particles appear and disappear in the quantum vacuum, the so-called empty space that is actually boiling with activity, with pairs of particles flickering in and out of existence, borrowing energy from the future to exist in the present, then vanishing before they have to pay it back. This is not science fiction. It is measured. It is confirmed. Empty space is not empty. Now bring this up a level.
The best current models of cosmology suggest that the universe itself could have originated as a quantum fluctuation. Not from nothing exactly, from a quantum vacuum, which is a physical thing, a sea of potential, but from no specific cause, just the inherent, uncaused randomness that lives at the bottom of reality. In other words, the universe may not have needed a push. It may have just happened, the way a radioactive nucleus just decays, not because anything caused it to, but because quantum mechanics permits it, and everything that is permitted eventually occurs. Come up another level still. The laws of physics themselves, the mathematical structures that govern everything from electrons to galaxies, may not have needed to be designed. The physicist Max Tegmark has proposed that all mathematically consistent universes exist.
Not in a mystical sense, but in the sense that mathematical existence and physical existence may be the same thing. If a set of equations is internally consistent, it describes a universe that exists somewhere in the landscape of all possible realities. In this framework, our universe doesn't need to be explained. It doesn't need a creator. It is simply one of infinitely many mathematically possible structures. And we find ourselves in this particular one because this particular one produces beings capable of asking questions. The universe explains itself. Not completely, not in every detail. But the need for an external explanation grows smaller with every layer we examine.
Now let's stretch our perspective across scales. Because one of the most powerful tools for understanding reality is to zoom, all the way in and all the way out. Zoom in first. Go below the atom, below the nucleus, below the quarks that make up the nucleus. Go to the scale of the Planck length, 10 to the power of -35 meters. This is not just small. At this scale, space and time themselves lose their smooth, continuous character. Space becomes foamy, turbulent, undefined. Time loses its arrow. The concepts of here and there, of before and after, they blur into something our mathematics can barely begin to describe. At this scale, the question, what caused the universe, may not just be difficult to answer. It may be a question that has no meaning. Because causation requires time, and at the Planck scale, time itself is questionable. Now zoom out. Zoom past the atom, past the cell, past the human, past the city, the continent, the earth, past the solar system, a tiny family of rocks and gas orbiting one star among 300 billion in our galaxy alone. Past the galaxy, past the galactic supercluster. Keep going until you reach the largest structures we can map, the cosmic web. Vast filaments of galaxy clusters stretching hundreds of millions of light years, woven together by gravity across the observable universe. The observable universe is 93 billion light years across, and it may be a vanishingly small bubble inside a vastly larger space. A multiverse in which universes like ours bubble up constantly from an eternally inflating sea of quantum fields. In this picture, our universe is not the whole story. It is one story among uncountable others. One set of physical laws among possible many. One roll of the quantum dice in a game that has been playing itself forever. Where is the creator in this picture? Not removed, but rendered unnecessary. Not disproven, but unneeded. Every layer of reality we examine, from the quantum foam at the Planck scale to the cosmic web at the edge of observation, shows us a universe that is self-organizing, self-sustaining, and self-explaining. Nature does not appear to have left a gap that requires filling. Every time we thought we found a gap and filled it with a divine hand, science eventually found a natural process that filled it better. Lightning was not Thor's anger. Disease was not divine punishment. The diversity of life was not separately designed. And the origin of the universe may not be an exception to this pattern. It may be the final,
grandest example of it. Here is the insight that everything we've explored leads to. The argument for a creator does not fail because it is stupid. It fails because it is incomplete. It takes a real mystery, the existence of the universe, and replaces it with a bigger mystery, then declares the problem solved. Why does the universe exist? Because God created it. Why does God exist? God just exists. But do you see what's happened? You've taken the unexplained thing, the universe, and replaced it with a more complex unexplained thing, an eternal, conscious, omnipotent being, and called that progress. You've hidden the mystery inside a name. The universe's existence is mysterious, no argument there. But an eternal, all-powerful, perfectly conscious being is more mysterious than a universe. It has more properties. It has intentions, awareness, will, knowledge, all of which require explanation. A being with all those properties is not simpler than a universe. It is far, far more complex. There is a principle in science and philosophy called parsimony, sometimes called Occam's razor. It says, when two explanations fit the facts equally well, prefer the simpler one. Don't multiply complexity beyond necessity. A universe that emerges from quantum probability, from the mathematical structure of reality itself, from the inherent randomness at the base of existence, requires no additional entities. It needs nothing outside itself to explain itself. A universe created by an eternal, conscious, omnipotent being requires that being, and then requires an explanation for that being which, by the rules everyone agreed to at the start, doesn't get to have one. That's not a solution. That's an exemption. And here is the deepest insight of all. The concept of God, as an explanation for existence, doesn't actually explain existence. It relocates the inexplicability. It moves the mystery from why does the universe exist to why does God exist? And then draws a curtain across that second question and says, thou shalt not look behind here. But the curtain is still there. The question is still alive. The mystery remains. We've just agreed not to ask it. And that agreed upon silence, is not knowledge. It is the oldest, most comfortable, and most human of all our habits. Let's be honest about something. This isn't really a conversation about physics. It's a conversation about what human beings can tolerate. Can we tolerate a universe with no author? A story with no narrator? An existence that just is, without justification, without purpose baked into the structure, without someone who put it here for a reason. That is, for most people, a terrifying thought. Not because it's logically incoherent, but because it's emotionally vertiginous. It's the feeling of standing at the edge of an infinite drop with no railing. And I want to say, clearly and without condescension, that feeling is real. That discomfort is human. There is no shame in it. But there is a difference between what we need emotionally and what is actually true about the structure of reality. We needed the sun to orbit the Earth. It didn't. We needed species to be fixed and permanent. They weren't. We needed the universe to be a few thousand years old, comfortably sized, made for us. It turned out to be 13.8 billion years old, incomprehensibly vast and indifferent to our presence. Reality has a long, unbroken history of not accommodating our emotional preferences. And perhaps, there is a different kind of comfort available on the other side of this realization. Not the comfort of an answer, not the warm assurance of a purpose handed down from above, but the stranger, more austere comfort of honesty. We are here. We don't know exactly why. We may never know. And that not knowing is not a failure. It is the honest state of a conscious creature at the frontier of its understanding. The universe doesn't owe us an explanation, and yet here we are, asking for one. That act of asking, that relentless, irrepressible, beautifully human refusal to stop wondering,
may itself be the most remarkable thing in all of existence.
So here we are. We started with a simple intuition that everything has a cause, and followed it all the way to the edge of what thought can reach. We found that causation breaks down at the beginning of time, that time itself may have no edge, that the quantum vacuum bubbles with uncaused events, that the universe may be self-contained, self-explanatory, requiring nothing outside itself to account for its existence. We found that the concept of a creator, when examined carefully, doesn't dissolve the mystery, it deepens it. That an eternal, conscious being is more complex than a universe, not less. That naming a mystery is not the same as solving it. That the oldest argument for divine existence rests on a premise. Everything that begins to exist has a cause that collapses the moment you realize the universe may not have begun in any meaningful sense. We found that the question, why is there something rather than nothing, may be the most profound question ever asked, and that the honest answer for now is, we don't know. And here's the final thought I want to leave you with. The universe has been around for 13.8 billion years. Intelligent, questioning life has existed for perhaps a few 100,000. We've had science, rigorous, self-correcting mathematical science, for a few 100 years. We are, by any cosmic measure, infants. And we are infants who are asking the deepest question it is possible to ask. That is not humiliating. That is extraordinary. The atoms in your body were forged in dying stars. The electrons in your neurons are performing quantum calculations right now. And the mind built from all of that, your mind, is sitting here in this moment, staring into the void at the beginning of time and refusing to look away. Whatever the universe is, whatever put it here or didn't, it produced something capable of wondering about itself. And that, perhaps, is the most astonishing fact of all.